Hi, and welcome to the Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson, and today we're talking to Simon Entwistle, who's a tour guide from Top Hat Tours. How are you, Simon?
Very well, thanks, David. Very well. Nice to talk to you.
It's lovely for you to be here. I think one of the things I miss most about being in lockdown is that there's no ghost tours to go on at the moment because it's so much part of our lives. And so I've asked Simon to come on today and maybe give us some ghost stories from his fabulous tours. He does 12 ghost tours throughout the north of England, and I will ask him about them in a little bit. So Simon, what are you doing to keep yourself busy at this time when you're such a prolific storyteller and ghost tour guide?
Well, the only good thing about lockdown for me, David, is having the time to read and to scour the internet and take in more knowledge. And I find the more stories you can get into your brain, then you've got a lot more material to use when we do finally come out of lockdown.
So that is very true. We do get a lot more time to do a little bit more research. When you started in 1996, sort of focusing on the Ribble Valley up there in the north of England. What drove you to become a professional storyteller and guide?
Right. The city of York, David. My wife and I went on a weekend break in York, and we went on a guided ghost tour. And York, of course, is a storyteller's dream. The guide was fantastic, and he sowed a seed in my brain. And when I got back to Clitheroe, I thought, well, okay, Clitheroe is not exactly a York, but it has got a beautiful castle in the centre of the town. I went to the local library, searched through some fantastic stories, and then started my first tour. And I was ever so fortunate because local radio came on the second one, and local regional television came in the third one. And I've gone from strength to strength. And for the very, very first time in my life, David, I found I was doing a job that I thoroughly enjoyed, a job where Monday morning didn't matter anymore, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do.
And I love it, really. I love storytelling.
Yeah, well, I was up in Clitheroe a couple of years ago. I actually went there specifically to meet a friend of mine, Barry McCann, who was going to show me around the Pendle witches'
Oh, yes.
locations. I imagine that must make a big part of what you do up there in Lancashire and arounds.
That story is a huge story, David. It's getting bigger and bigger every year. I do lots of coach tours relating to Pendle witches, and I do take paranormal groups onto Pendle Hill, where I will tell them the whole story, and they bring their mediums in, and they pick up things which the average person can't get. I mean, I'm not a medium, not a clairvoyant, not a certainly not a psychic, but these people really can pick up things, and so the hill is very, very atmospheric, very seductive.
What do you think it is about? Is it just because they're witches? Why is Pendle growing in popularity?
Well, because the story is so unique. Steven Spielberg would have a holiday on that hill. He really would. We're talking about 12 local people, of which 9 couldn't read or write. They lived away from society. They lived in a forest called the Forest of Pendle, and they lived off the land. 2 of them were quite unique, Demdike and Chattox. They were over 85 years old. They defied the laws of nature because life expectancy in those days would be 35. But they knew about plants. And of course, all modern plants do give us modern medicines, of course.
Yeah.
And these women knew about herbs and things. And that's what I think kept them alive for so long, really. But in those days, to reach that age would be classed as something quite supernatural, really.
Yeah. So I mean, Pendle. I mean, the witches aren't the only spooky thing about Pendle. There are lots of graveyards, churches, haunted places. Can you maybe tell us about some of your favourite places around? And I believe the railway station at Clitheroe is haunted.
Very, very much so, David. I find to conduct a tour, you can read about ghost stories, but it's always great to meet an eyewitness account. And I met a lovely chap called Bill. Bill was born in Clitheroe. His little house had a garden at the back of it, which went right down to the railway line, where there was fencing. He would sit on the fence and wave to the engine drivers as they went past, and he became infatuated with the railway. He told his mum and dad, when I leave school, I'm going to work on the railway. Left school at 14, got a job at Clitheroe station as a wheel tapper. As the trains came in, he would tap the wheels, make sure they weren't broken. Age of 18, he got a job as a fireman on what we call a Black 5 locomotive. Age of 21, he got the job of his dreams, a steam engine driver. For the very first time, he took the engines down the line from Carlisle right down to Manchester. And when he went past his mum and dad's house, and they go rushing down to the garden to wave at him. The summer of 1952 was absolutely beautiful. And as he took the engine down the line, there's a tunnel called the Suff Tunnel in between Blackburn and Manchester. At the end of the tunnel are two beautiful open fields with fencing on both sides near the tunnel entrance. He saw a little boy with straw-coloured hair sitting on the fence, just waving frantically. And of course, Bill would and wave at him. He saw this little boy every day for the next 4 weeks, always sitting on the fence, always waiting for him. However, in October that year, as he took the engine down the line, he noticed the little boy was not sitting on the fence, but standing in the field next to the fence, surrounded by sheep. And as Bill glanced from the engine across the fields, the little boy started to run towards the fencing, and Bill noted this little boy was indeed running through sleeping sheep. The sheep didn't even know he was there. Bill elbowed the fireman. Look at that, look at that. Sorry, mate, too busy shoveling. The train went into the tunnel. They got to Manchester and changed the freight over. And the fireman said, Bill, you've been very, very quiet. What's the problem? Well, that young lad, you know the young lad we see sitting on the fence every day? Oh, yeah. He wasn't there today. He was in the centre of the field, and when he saw us, he started to run towards the fencing, and he was running through sleeping sheep. No, you're seeing things, Bill. They came back up north, and as the train was about to enter the Suff Tunnel from the Manchester side, they saw a red light being held up by a police sergeant. Bill slowed the engine down. What's wrong, officer? Oh, terrible. There's been a young lad killed at the entrance to the tunnel. Oh, sergeant, that's terrible. Really is. He lost his brother there 5 years ago. Oh, sergeant, that's really terrible news. Yes, it wasn't very pleasant seeing the family. No, it wouldn't be, said Bill. They got permission to now take the engine through the tunnel. And as Bill brought the locomotive out into bright sunshine on the Darwin side of the tunnel, he glanced to the left and saw the straw-coloured haired boy holding the hand of a much taller boy. As Bill turned to wave at them, they both faded into thin air. Bill elbowed the fireman. Did you see that? Did you see that? Sorry, mate, too busy shoveling. Bill never saw them again, but when I met him, you can always tell when someone is telling you a true and honest story, and that came from Bill's heart. Quite a romantic story, really, David.
Do you collect most of your stories? I mean, obviously you read a lot, but that one you got from the Witness, which is
yes.
I'm still a little chilled by it, but I'll move on because it is obviously a very sad story.
Yes.
You found that directly from the man's mouth. I
did. I work a lot with councils in the area, particularly tourism officers, and I got that story from Bill, and we put an ad in the local press for stories relating to ghosts. Heroes, ghosts, murders and mysteries, and Bill came forward, and it's a story which has always touched me very much, really.
Yeah, no, it is really. I mean, it's creepy in itself, but it's also very, very sad. So
yeah,
I didn't mean to rush through there, but it's a. I mean, I think we tend to forget about the sorrow that involves a lot of these ghost stories.
Oh yes,
and how it touches us. Have you ever had any you've touched yourself through your own personal experiences?
Very, very much so. And this next story really is the sort of story which I wouldn't blame you, David, for not believing. But I do know my wife will be watching this, and also one of the other witnesses will be watching this as well. We're going to turn the clock back now to 1960, when I was literally 5 years old. My dad bought this beautiful Victorian house in South Lakeland near Kendal. And I remember the Pickford's vehicle arriving. We filled it full of tea chests, climbed on board and made the journey up from Lancashire up to South Cumbria. When we arrived at this beautiful Victorian house, I looked up at the 3 stories. It was a house by itself in its own grounds with the Lake District fells behind it, beautiful scenes across Morecambe Bay, and I fell in love with the house at first sight. And still, I'm deeply in love with that house. But that night, my father was going to experience something very, very, very paranormal. We arrived as a family, my brother, sister and I. We were all under 10 years of age, and Mum and Dad made our beds up very, very quickly, and we fell into a deep sleep. Because it was a country house, the last job that needed to be done was to put up any curtains, and Mum and Dad were getting very tired by 1 o'clock in the morning. They made their bed up and climbed into bed, My father remembered bright, bright moonlight coming into the bedroom. Bright, bright moonlight. He turned over and heard the sounds of tiny footsteps. The door of the bedroom slowly opened and in came a liver and white cocker spaniel. "What's that dog doing there? How did it get in the house?" he said. "I must have left the door open downstairs." He got out of bed, walked towards the dog to grab its collar. Come on, let's have you." His hand went straight through it. He stroked his forehead, made a second attempt, and his hand went through the dog again. The dog then turned to look at the window as if its name was being called and then faded away. My father sat in the bed in a state of shock. My mother woke up with a jolt. "Oh, I've just had a strange dream. There's a man outside in Victorian clothing with a dog lead in his hand, pointing up at our bedroom window." My father then told her what he'd just seen. Now, I was only 5 years old. My dad never told me this story until I was 15 years old. And that very, very year, he sold the house, which broke my heart. It really did, because I love that building very, very dearly. However, David, this is where the story takes a very, very sinister twist. Oh. Only 4 years ago, my wife and I went on a Mediterranean cruise, P&O cruises, thoroughly enjoyed it, all across the Mediterranean. And you have what's called a black tie event in the restaurant at night time. I went down there, enjoyed a thoroughly good meal, and about 3 tables away, there was a very, very attractive young lady that kept looking at me, and I thought, I really cannot be that good looking. But as it happened, she knew me, and she came across and said, "It's Simon, isn't it?" "That's right." She said, "I come from the village of Chapman, not too far from where you live. I've been in your tours, I quite like them." "Oh, yes." She said, "Have you ever thought about doing a PowerPoint show on the cruises?" I said, "Well, would people like ghosts, murders and mysteries?" "Oh, they may do," she said. "I'll give you an email address when you get back to England, and then you can contact them for an audition." So I got back to England and I emailed P&O. Within 3 days, to my delight, I got a response saying, would I like to audition in Surrey or Cumbria? I thought, well, Cumbria's up the road from where I live, so it's definitely Cumbria. I telephoned a lady called Maureen. She was the cruise director, and she said she lived in South Cumbria. And she said, "I'm going to give you a sat-nav code for my house, son. It's rather hard to find. And if you bring your laptop and your projector, we'll have the audition at my home." I put the sat-nav code in and found myself driving towards the city of Lancaster, from Lancaster right up to the little village called Milnthorpe, which I knew very, very well, into Heversham, where I went to school, and then over a place called Heversham Head, then down a very, very familiar road, which took me straight up to that house, David, the same house my dad had sold all those years ago. When I got there, of course, I was gobsmacked. I could not believe this. 44 million to 1 against.
Yeah.
I knocked on the door. Maureen opened the door. Said, "Simon, you look a bit jaded." I said, "Well, Maureen, I used to live here." "No." I said, "Yes, I did. I've got some pictures on my laptop of my childhood from this very house." We went inside. I saw familiar doorknobs, familiar floors, familiar ceiling, and she went to make me a cup of tea. I then told her about my father's experience with the liver and white spaniel. The cup fell through her fingers and smashed on the floor, and her eyes opened with quite shock. I said, "Simon, we've lived here for some 11 years now, and my brother lives in London. He came at last Christmas to spend Christmas with us. The very, very first night, Christmas Eve, he was asleep upstairs when the door opened, and in came a liver and white cocker spaniel." I looked at the ceiling and said, "You know, Dad, thank you for that. My dad passed away some time ago, but it does confirm, David, that there is something out there."
It's amazing. Even just the fact that it was that you went to the same house is an amazing coincidence. And to
I
add
was
that to
shocked.
it,
Really shocked. Really shocked. I'd say Louise is actually a friend of mine on Facebook, and she'll see this. And if anyone wants to confirm, I know she will do.
That's a fantastic story. I'd love to hear her confirmation. Not that I disbelieve you, but it'd be wonderful to have that evidence to say that story's there. So,
yeah.
I mean, Lancashire is obviously full of hauntings, because we know that through the Spooky Isles and all the other stories we receive through our correspondence and yourself. They're not all sort of fun, sort of, missing dogs and, coincidences like that. There's a lot of murder, a lot of horrible stuff. And I believe your tours do focus on some crime.
Yeah. I do what's called heroes and villains tours in a lot of the Lancashire towns, and some of these stories would make great films. One of them was a little bit gruesome, but we'll turn the clock back now to the 25th of October, 1875, and a disappearance of a young girl called Emily Holland. She's 9 years old. She's walking home from school with the two brothers, and as they get to a corner, she just disappears. Her two brothers carry on walking, turn around. Where's Emily? She just disappeared. No, she must have run up ahead of us and got home before we did. They got home and she wasn't there. Her mother and father were furious. You should have stayed with her. Well, she just disappeared. How can anyone disappear? The parents rushed down into Blackburn town centre to the police station. There they met Inspector Potts, Detective Livesey and Inspector Eastwood. I said, don't worry, we'll organise search parties. For 7 days, that's exactly what they did do, to no avail. On the 8th day, a gentleman called Mr. Peter Fairclough took his dog into the park, and the dog came out of the park with some newspaper in its mouth, saturated in blood. Get that out your mouth, shouted Fairclough. He tugged the newspaper, and out came a child's hand. Quite naturally, deeply shocked, Livesey, Potts and Eastwood arrived, and they ascertained the hand belonged to little Emily Holland. They were horrified. An hour later, a Mrs. White from North Blackburn had been walking to work, and she had tripped over some more newspapers, saturated in blood. She lifted the newspapers up, opened them, and was horrified to find the torso of a child. She was violently sick, as you can imagine. The officers, when they arrived, they were very, very upset as well, and they took the remains back to the mortuary in Blackburn. As they looked inside the newspapers, Inspector Eastwood noted lots of human hair belonging to different human beings. I've got it. Whoever committed this despicable act on this young girl was a barber. This human hair in here belonged to different people. So therefore they thought, right, let's try every barber's shop in Blackburn. There were some 26 individual barbers. They arrived at Mr. William Fisher's shop. He was 25 years of age, had a wife and 2 daughters, and was considered to be quite a civilised sort of bloke, really. As they went into the shop, they saw a huge pile of Lancashire Telegraph newspapers, the same newspaper that had been used to wrap the poor girl's organs in. And Eastwood took his pad out, looked at the numbers, and said, where's last week's Lancashire Herald, Mr. Fish? I used it this morning, sir, to light the fire. And they accepted his story. Remember, he was 25 years old, wife, 2 daughters, considered to be quite respectable. They left the shop, went back to the police station, and they were no nearer to catching this maniac. The billboards outside from the local newspaper were getting rather nasty, really, saying, Blackburn police incompetent, no nearer to catching maniac. But they couldn't get any leads. That's when a local mill owner put up £100 to anyone who could find the murderer. And also the Home Office in London put up £100 again to see if they could find the murderer. So £200, 1875, a lot of money. Who should pick up the gauntlet but a young lad from Preston called Peter Livesey? Peter was just 11 years of age. He had a dog called Morgan, and he wrote to the police and said, look, I've got this little dog called Morgan. He's got a great scent of smell. He'll find your murderer. Eastwood, Potts and Livesey had a good laugh, but they looked out of the window and they saw the billboard that day was really, really aggressive. Blackburn police not worth ratepayers' money, no nearer to catching maniac. Eastwood said, look, we've tried everything, bring him in. They met the young lad at the railway station with this little dog called Morgan. It was a collie lurcher cross on a piece of baling string as a dog lead, shivering in the cold. Sir, my dog just needs to get a scent from them newspapers. He'll find your murderer. The 3 officers had a good laugh, but they said, well, okay, we'll do it. They took Peter and the dog to the mortuary, brought the remains of poor Emily out, and the dog started to bark quite ferociously. Sir, he's got a scent. They opened the door. Morgan ran down Jubilee Street, down Darwin Street, and straight to the top of Normanton Street, where Fish's barber's shop was situated. The dog started scratching at the door. Behind the frosty door was a very frosty-faced William Fish, deeply shocked at these 3 officers, this young boy and the dog. He opened the door. The dog went straight for his feet, straight to the front room, and started barking at the chimney. Peter shouted, Sir, me dog knows there's somewhat up that chimney, sir. Right, arrest Fish, said Eastwood. He handcuffed him and forced him to the floor, whilst Potts and Livesey knelt down, reached behind the chimney breast, and they found some more newspaper. They brought the newspaper out and found the charred remains of poor Emily's dress. Now, in those days, the police were allowed to be a bit more persuasive than they are nowadays, and they gave Fish a good hiding in the shop. He was then taken to Kirkdale, Liverpool, put on trial, where he admitted to the murder. He said he'd been drinking very, very heavily that day, and as young Emily came past, for some indescribable reason, he grabbed the poor girl, committed a terrible act on her, and then strangled her. As Eastwood was quite right, he tried to dissect her on the floor of the barber's shop, and that's when this human hair got swept into the same newspaper. The one thing William Fish did become was the very, very first Lancastrian ever to be a Madame Tussauds waxwork dummy. Was on display at Madame Tussauds from 1875 to 1905, was known simply as the Blackburn Butcher. A pretty grisly story, that, David.
It is. It really is. And I don't really want to end on that. I want you to give us something a bit, I'm thinking a fascinating and a fabulous storyteller, and I'm a bit too gripped with what you've just told me. So, can you maybe give us something to end on that's slightly less depressing than that, but maybe give us an indication of something that people would see, and obviously they would hear all those stories. So they went on one of the top hat tours that you'll be putting on once the lockdown's all over. You'll be back as you've been doing since 1996. Give us a story that's not going to depress us, but maybe just give us a little bit of spooky creepiness.
Okay, we're going to go to a lovely place called Samlesbury Hall. Now, Samlesbury Hall is a great listed building.
Yes.
You may have been there, David. You may have been there.
I haven't been there, but we've had a few articles about it on the Spooky Isle, so we know what it is. So tell us about it.
This is a spooky story with a rather beautiful ending, actually. We're going to turn the clock back now to 1926. The hall was built in the year 1322, and that year it was renovated. They couldn't let any Tom, Dick and Harry work in the hall. It had to be someone who was highly skilled in medieval buildings. One such person fitted the bill quite beautifully, and wait for his name, Mr. Michael Palin. No relation to our Monty Python star whatsoever. Michael was a highly accomplished renovator of medieval buildings. He'd worked in Levens Hall in Cumbria, Bram Hall in Cheshire, Bodelwyd in North Wales. He knew his stuff. He arrived on a gorgeous June day in 1923 with his 4 apprentices. He gave each apprentice a different part of the building to work on, and he chose the main hall. He got his ladder, climbed up the ladder to the top near the roof there, where there was some old and eroded stone. With a hammer and chisel, he chiselled away at the old stone and knocked a block off. As it fell towards the earth, he was horrified to find standing beneath it a little boy with curly black hair. He shouted, "Look out!" The little boy just stood there. The stone came down, grazed his nose, and landed right in front of his toes. Palin came down the ladder to give this lad a piece of his mind, but the role was reversed. The little boy shouted, "You shouldn't be here! You shouldn't be here! Mr. Hartley won't like it." "Look, lad, I've got a job to do. You stand back. You could have been very badly injured." He climbed up the ladder, turned round, the little boy gone. Strange. He must be a quick runner. For the next 5 months, they worked their socks off, bringing in new timber, new stone, new tiles, and Samlesbury Hall was beginning to look a bit like its former self once again. They arrived as usual for another hard day's graft on a bitterly cold December day. The blue sky disappeared and was filled with clouds full of snow, deep, deep snow. The heavens opened and snow came down from the heavens with a wind, a blizzard. Michael looked out of the window and saw the snow was rising up towards the window edges. He said to his 4 boys, "I'm really sorry, lads. Tonight, there's no way we'll get home. The roads will be clogged with snow. We'll have to spend the night here." The 4 boys complained it was getting towards Christmas, but they realised outside was a blizzard of incredible proportions. Michael said, "It will be dark by 4:30. We'll trudge into the nearby forest, get lots of firewood, and keep the fire going in the main hall all night." By 4:30, it was completely dark. They brought back tree trunks, they brought back branches and twigs, and they got a glowing fire going. Now, in those days, no Nintendos, no mobile phones, no radio, no television. The only form of entertainment would be a good night's sleep, really. So the 4 of them got their bedrolls, rolled them out in front of the fire, and fell into a deep sleep. Michael was an ardent Christian. He climbed on his bedroll, had a few words with the good Lord upstairs, and then he glanced to the right where the door leading into the main hall was, and saw a beautiful golden glowing light. And out of that golden glowing light suddenly stepped a very, very beautiful young lady in Georgian dress. She elegantly made her way past Palin, in between the sleeping apprentices, knelt down in front of the fire, and put her hands together in prayer, and prayed that her husband would survive the war. She then shimmered and crackled and left a real scent in the air. Michael's heart accelerated in his chest. His mouth went dry. He gingerly glanced for the second time at the door and saw another golden glowing shape. And out of that golden glowing shape stepped a First World War army officer who walked straight through Palin, put his hand on top of the mantelpiece and uttered the words, "Hope I survived the war." He too disappeared. By now, Palin, from his vantage point on the floor, on his bedroll, is deeply upset. He's witnessed something very, very paranormal. He gingerly, nervously, looks at the door for the third time and sees a much smaller golden glowing light. And out of that small glowing light appeared the little boy with the curly black hair that had nearly been hit by the stone in June of that year. He ran past Palin, but through the sleeping apprentices. As you can imagine, Michael did not sleep very well that night, but quite surprisingly, when he woke up, he didn't tell the 4 apprentices. He didn't tell anyone, not even his wife and children. But some 20 years later, in 1943, as an elderly gentleman, he was walking past Samlesbury Hall on a lovely summer's afternoon. He saw parked outside the main entrance a military vehicle belonging to the Royal Air Force. He thought, RAF, what are they doing there? He walked across the lawns, got to the front door, which leads into the main hall, and saw by the fireplace that he had renovated all those years ago were 2 Royal Air Force personnel. One was a female, one was a male in RAF uniform. The door clicked, they turned round, Palin entered the room and made eye contact with a young lady in the RAF uniform. He just stood and stared at her. Quite naturally, she felt very embarrassed. May I help you, please? Her companion, the officer, intervened. Can we help you, please? Palin recognised the young girl in the RAF uniform to be the same beautiful young lady he'd seen walk out of that golden light in the Tudor dress. He told her, she burst into tears, Mr. Palin, I don't disbelieve a word you've told me, but I'm from the city of Leicester. I've never been to Lancashire in my life before, but as we drove past, I shouted, stop, stop, I know this place. I've been here before. And you, Mr. Palin, have just answered my anxieties. A truly beautiful story.
It is, and that's a much nicer way of ending than with the previous story you told. But well, Simon, I know we're on lockdown, and so therefore I'm imagining we don't know when the next ghost tours are going to be. But if people wanted to contact you so they could at least be put on a waiting list or find out more information, how can they do that?
I've got a website, David, called www.tophattours.co.uk. I'm also on Facebook under Simon Entwistle, and I do have a book which I wrote last year, which can be found on Amazon and Kindle, and that's called simply Simon Entwistle: Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected.
Okay, well, what we'll do is we'll put that all down, all the links, so people can find it all down in the description, and I'll be making sure I get myself a copy because I want to know more, and I also want to come on one of your tours once this is all over. Because you've got 12 of them, and I'm sure every one of them is well worth going on. So you take care of yourself, Simon. We maybe look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Really hope so, David. Thank you for your time. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.